The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Ruby's diner as Riley adjusted her prosthetic leg one more time before getting out of her modified van. She had been making this same trip every Tuesday for the past 8 months, ever since Dr. Peterson at the VA hospital suggested she might benefit from talking with other veterans who understood what she was going through. Riley was 32 years old, though some days she felt much older. The explosion that changed her life happened on a dusty road outside Kandahar 3 years ago. She remembered everything about that day with crystal clarity. The heat, the smell of diesel fuel from their convoy, the way Corporal Williams was joking about his girlfriend's cooking just seconds before the world turned upside down. The improvised explosive device took her left leg below the knee and left her with scars that ran much deeper than the ones visible on her skin. But Riley wasn't the type to dwell on what she'd lost. She never had been, not even as a kid growing up in small-town Ohio. Her father, a factory worker with calloused hands and a gentle heart, always told her that life wasn't about what happened to you, but how you dealt with what happened to you. Those words had carried her through Marine boot camp, through 2 deployments, and now through the daily challenge of rebuilding her civilian life. The diner sat on State Route 47, one of those classic American roadside spots that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead and pie that could make you forget your troubles, at least temporarily. Truckers loved the place because there was plenty of room to park their big rigs. Local folks came for the gossip and the comfort food, and veterans like Riley came because Ruby, the owner, understood that sometimes people needed a place where nobody asked too many questions. As Riley made her way across the parking lot, she noticed a group of motorcycles parked in an odd pattern near the front entrance. 5 or 6 Harley-Davidsons, all black and chrome, with various patches and decorations that suggested their riders took themselves pretty seriously. A couple of them were parked across the handicapped spaces, their back wheels just touching the blue painted lines. Riley frowned slightly but didn't think much of it. In her experience, most people weren't deliberately inconsiderate. They just didn't think. She'd learned not to assume the worst in people, though her military training had taught her to always be aware of her surroundings. The bell above the diner door chimed as she entered, and Ruby looked up from behind the counter with her usual warm smile. Ruby was somewhere in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of face that had seen enough of life to be genuinely kind without being naive. "Hey there, honey," Ruby called out. "Your friends are already in the back booth. Can I get you your usual coffee to start?" Riley nodded and made her way toward the back of the diner, where she could see 3 familiar faces waiting for her. There was Tommy, a Navy veteran who'd served on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf and now worked at the hardware store in town. Next to him sat Maria, an Army medic who'd done 2 tours in Iraq and was currently studying to be a nurse. And across from them was old Pete, who wasn't actually that old at 45, but had earned the nickname because he'd been in the service longer than the rest of them, 4 tours with the Army Rangers that had left him with a Distinguished Service Cross and a tremor in his left hand that he tried to hide by keeping it wrapped around his coffee cup. "Look, who finally decided to show up," Tommy said with a grin, though there was genuine warmth in his voice. "We were just talking about whether you'd chickened out on us." "Traffic," Riley replied, settling into the booth and accepting the coffee that Ruby had already brought over. "Plus, I had to stop at the VA to pick up some paperwork. You know how that goes." Maria nodded knowingly. "Did you have to deal with Johnson again?" "The one and only." Riley took a sip of her coffee and felt some of the morning's tension ease. That man could make filing a simple form feel like planning a military operation. "Speaking of operations," old Pete said, his voice dropping to the conspiratorial tone he always used when he was about to share gossip. "Did you guys hear about what happened over in Millfield last weekend?" The conversation flowed easily, as it always did. They talked about work, about families, about the small victories and daily struggles that made up civilian life. They discussed the new physical therapy techniques Maria was learning, Tommy's idea to start a motorcycle repair business, and Pete's ongoing battle with the VA over his disability rating. These Tuesday meetings had become more important to Riley than she'd initially expected. When Dr. Peterson first suggested them, she'd been skeptical. She wasn't much for group therapy or sharing her feelings with strangers. But somehow talking with people who'd been where she'd been, who understood the particular challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life, made things easier. They didn't spend much time talking about their service directly. That wasn't really the point. Instead, they talked about the practical stuff. How to deal with employers who didn't understand military experience. How to navigate the VA system. How to explain to family members why certain sounds or situations could still be difficult. Riley found herself laughing at one of Tommy's stories about a customer at the hardware store who insisted on explaining how to use a screwdriver to someone who'd spent 6 years maintaining complex naval equipment. It felt good to laugh, to be around people who understood that you could be grateful for your service while still finding parts of civilian life frustrating. About an hour into their conversation, Riley noticed that the noise level in the diner had changed. There was more laughter coming from the front section, louder voices, the kind of boisterous energy that suggested someone was showing off. She glanced toward the front of the restaurant and caught a glimpse of leather jackets and the glint of chain wallets. "Looks like the motorcycle club rolled in," Maria observed, following Riley's gaze. Old Pete's expression darkened slightly. "That's the Iron Wolves. They've been causing some trouble around the county lately. Nothing too serious, but they like to make sure everyone knows they're tough guys." Riley filed that information away without really thinking about it. In her experience, most people who worked hard to look tough usually weren't as tough as they wanted others to believe. Still, she'd learned in the military to pay attention to potential problems before they became actual problems. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes before Tommy announced he had to get back to the hardware store for the afternoon shift. Maria had class at the community college, and Pete was meeting his grandson for lunch. Riley usually stayed a bit longer, enjoying the quiet of the diner and the luxury of not having anywhere particular to be. As her friends gathered their things and said their goodbyes, Riley felt the familiar pang of loneliness that always came at the end of these meetings. It wasn't that she was unhappy with her life exactly, but sometimes the gap between her military family and her civilian existence felt particularly wide. She waved goodbye to Ruby and made her way toward the front door, already thinking about her afternoon plans. She had some grocery shopping to do, and she'd promised her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, that she'd help move some boxes down from her attic. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was hers, and she was learning to be okay with that. As she pushed open the diner door, Riley noticed that the motorcycle riders were now standing around their bikes, talking loudly and laughing. She couldn't make out their words, but their body language suggested the kind of aggressive energy that she'd learned to recognize during her years of military service. Riley took a deep breath and headed toward her van, hoping they'd mind their own business as much as she intended to mind hers. Riley stepped outside into the afternoon heat, squinting as her eyes adjusted to the bright sunlight. The parking lot felt different now than it had when she'd arrived an hour ago. The motorcycle group was no longer just standing around their bikes. They were spread out across the lot, and their laughter had an edge to it that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She walked steadily toward her van, keeping her pace normal despite the uncomfortable feeling growing in her stomach. Years of military service had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were telling her to be alert. As she got closer to her vehicle, Riley's heart sank. 2 of the motorcycles were now parked directly behind her van, blocking her exit. She could see that her wheelchair ramp, which she'd left deployed for easy access, had been moved. Not damaged, but definitely moved out of place. "Excuse me," she called out politely to the nearest biker, a heavy-set man with a gray beard and arms covered in tattoos. "I need to get my van out. Could you move your bike, please?" The man looked up from the conversation he'd been having with 2 other riders. His eyes swept over Riley, taking in her prosthetic leg and the way she walked. A slow smile spread across his face, but it wasn't a friendly one. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for the other bikers to hear. "Looks like we got ourselves a genuine war hero here, boys." The other men turned to look at Riley, and she felt that familiar tightness in her chest that came when she became the center of unwanted attention. She'd dealt with this before. People who either wanted to treat her like she was made of glass or like she was some kind of curiosity. "I just need to get to my van," Riley repeated, keeping her voice steady. "If you could just move your bikes, I'll be out of your way." A younger biker with a shaved head and a leather vest covered in patches stepped forward. Riley automatically cataloged his movement. Aggressive posture, hands loose at his sides, positioning himself to block her direct path to the van. Her Marine training kicked in without her even thinking about it. "What's the rush, soldier girl?" the young one said. "We're just having a friendly conversation here." "I'm not looking for trouble," Riley replied. She shifted her weight slightly, balancing herself in case she needed to move quickly. "I just want to go home." The bearded man, who seemed to be their leader, walked over to Riley's ramp and nudged it with his boot. "This is a pretty fancy setup you got here. Must have cost the taxpayers a pretty penny." Riley felt her jaw tighten. She'd heard variations of this comment before, the implication that her disability benefits were somehow unearned or excessive. It never stopped stinging, especially coming from people who had no idea what military service actually involved. "That ramp helps me get in and out of my van," she said simply. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't touch it." "Or what?" The young biker stepped closer, close enough that Riley could smell cigarettes and beer on his breath. "You gonna call the cops on us? Tell them some bikers were mean to the poor little disabled veteran?" The group laughed, and Riley realized that more motorcycles had arrived while she'd been inside the diner. What started as 5 or 6 bikes was now closer to a dozen, and she was surrounded by men who clearly thought intimidating a disabled woman was entertaining. Riley's mind automatically shifted into tactical mode. She counted the exits from the parking lot, 2, but both could be blocked easily. She noted potential weapons within reach. A few rocks, a broken piece of concrete near the dumpster, nothing substantial. She calculated distances and angles, assessing which direction would give her the best chance if she needed to move fast. But mostly, she tried to de-escalate. "Look, I don't want any problems with you guys," she said, addressing the bearded leader directly. "I'm sure you're just having fun, but I really do need to get going." "Having fun?" Another biker, this one tall and thin with arms like sticks, laughed mockingly. "We're just curious about America's finest here. Tell us, hero, was it worth it? Trading your leg for whatever it is we're supposed to be fighting for over there?" Riley felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm not going to discuss my service with you." "Aw, come on," the young biker said. He started walking in a circle around Riley, forcing her to turn to keep him in sight. "We're all Americans here. We got a right to know what our tax dollars bought us." The leader kicked the ramp again, harder this time. "Seems like all we got was more broken soldiers coming home expecting handouts." Riley's hands clenched into fists before she consciously relaxed them. Getting angry wouldn't help her situation. She needed to stay calm and look for an opportunity to either get help or get out of there. "I'm going to ask you one more time to please move your bikes," she said, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned as a Marine sergeant. "I don't want to cause problems for anyone." "Problems?" The leader laughed. "Lady, you already got problems. Question is, how big are those problems gonna get?" One of the newer arrivals, a man with a red bandana tied around his head, pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is gonna be great for the club's social media. Look at this, everybody. Disabled vet thinks she's tough." Riley realized the situation was escalating beyond simple harassment. These men were feeding off each other's energy, and the addition of cameras made them bolder. She'd seen this dynamic before. Groups of people who individually might not cause trouble but together became something dangerous. She reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her system. "I'm calling the police," she announced clearly. "Go ahead," the leader said. "Sheriff's department is 20 minutes away on a good day. We got plenty of time to get to know each other better." The young biker stepped closer again. "Maybe we should see how that fake leg of yours works. I bet it comes off pretty easy." Riley's thumb found the emergency app on her phone that Dr. Peterson had insisted she install. It wasn't just connected to 911. It was tied into a special network for veterans in crisis situations. She'd never used it before, never thought she'd need to. "You know what I think?" the thin biker said, moving to block Riley's view of the diner. "I think our hero here is scared. Look at her shaking." Riley wasn't shaking, but she let them think she was. Sometimes appearing weaker than you were could be an advantage. She pressed the emergency button on her app and felt a small vibration confirming the signal had gone out. The leader walked over to Riley's van and ran his finger along the side. "Nice paint job. Be a real shame if something happened to it." "Don't touch my van," Riley said, her military bearing showing through despite her vulnerable position. "Or what? You gonna stop me?" He laughed and deliberately scraped his key along the driver's side door. Riley felt something cold settle in her stomach. These weren't just bullies looking for a reaction. They were escalating toward real property damage and possibly worse. The man with the phone was still recording, narrating for his audience. "Check this out, folks. Tough military girl can't even protect her own ride." More bikes were pulling into the parking lot. Riley counted at least 15 men now, and she was completely surrounded. The diner seemed impossibly far away, though it was only 50 yards behind her. The leader kicked over a plastic chair that belonged to the diner, then looked directly at Riley. "You know what? I don't think you're going anywhere for a while. We're just getting started here." Riley kept her expression calm, but inside her mind was racing. Her emergency signal was out there, but she had no idea who might respond or how long it would take. She was on her own against a group that was clearly working up the courage for something worse than harassment. She straightened her shoulders and looked the leader directly in the eye. "I served my country for 6 years. I've been through things you can't imagine. If you think you're going to intimidate me, you picked the wrong person." The leader's smile faltered for just a moment, but then he laughed. "Big talk from someone who can barely stand up. Boys, I think our hero needs a lesson in respect." 40 miles away, Jake Coleman was adjusting his scope on a rifle range when his phone buzzed with the distinctive alert tone he'd programmed for emergency calls. As a former Navy SEAL who now ran Blackwater Security Solutions, a company staffed entirely by former Special Operations veterans, Jake knew that sound meant someone was in serious trouble. He glanced at his phone and saw the red emergency notification from the Veteran Crisis Network. The app showed a GPS location, a veteran's profile, and the words "Immediate Assistance Required" flashing across the screen. Jake's blood ran cold when he saw the name on the alert. Riley Martinez. He'd never met her personally, but he knew her story. Every Special Operations veteran who'd served in Afghanistan during that time knew about the Marine sergeant who'd saved an entire convoy by staying behind to provide covering fire while her unit evacuated wounded soldiers. The same explosion that cost her a leg had saved a dozen lives, including Jake's younger brother Danny, who'd been a corpsman with her unit. "What is it?" asked Tanner, Jake's business partner and former Delta Force operator, who was lying prone at the shooting position next to him. Jake was already packing up his rifle. "Emergency call. That Marine who saved Danny's convoy 3 years ago. She's in trouble." Tanner didn't need any more explanation. He started gathering his gear immediately. Both men had lost friends to suicide and overdoses after coming home from deployments. The Veteran Crisis Network wasn't just a business partnership for them, it was personal. Jake pulled up the GPS coordinates while speed dialing 3 more numbers. The location showed Riley was at Ruby's Diner, about 25 minutes away if they drove fast. What made it even more urgent was that Jake's team had been conducting training exercises at an abandoned warehouse just 15 miles from that exact spot. "Wesley," Jake said when the first call connected, "drop everything. We have a code red at Ruby's Diner on Route 47, Riley Martinez." Wesley didn't ask questions. As a former Army Ranger, he understood that when Jake used someone's full name during an emergency call, it meant the situation was personal. The second call reached Cooper, a former Marine Force recon specialist who was currently teaching tactical driving to local police departments. "Coop, I need you to meet us at Ruby's Diner. Now, bring your gear." The third call went to Garrett, an ex-Air Force pararescue operator who served as the team's medic. "Medical bag, full tactical gear, Ruby's Diner. Move." Within 60 seconds, Jake and Tanner were in Jake's black Ford F-250, racing down back roads toward the diner. Jake had called the local sheriff's department, but the dispatcher told him all units were tied up with a multi-car accident on the other side of the county. Estimated response time was 30 to 45 minutes. Jake pressed harder on the accelerator. Meanwhile, back at the diner parking lot, Riley's situation was getting worse. The leader of the motorcycle group had kicked over her ramp completely, and 2 more bikers had joined the circle around her. She could hear them discussing whether to teach her a lesson or just mess with her van a little more. Riley remained calm on the outside, but her mind was working frantically. She'd positioned herself with her back to her van, giving her some protection from behind. She'd also maneuvered so that her prosthetic leg was planted firmly, ready to support her weight if she needed to move quickly. "You know what I think?" said a new biker who'd just arrived. He was smaller than the others but had the kind of wiry build that suggested he might be more dangerous than he looked. "I think we should see how tough our little war hero really is." The man with the phone was still recording, apparently live streaming the harassment to social media. "Y'all are watching history here. About to see what happens when fake heroes meet real Americans." Riley felt her jaw clench at the word fake, but she forced herself to stay focused. Getting angry would only make things worse. The bearded leader walked closer, close enough that she could see the crude tattoos covering his arms. "Here's what's gonna happen, soldier girl. You're gonna apologize for taking up space in our country. Then you're gonna get down on your knees and thank us for letting you leave." "I'm not doing any of that," Riley said quietly. "Oh, I think you are." He gestured to his friends. "See, there's 15 of us and one of you. Math's pretty simple." Riley's phone buzzed in her hand. A text message from an unknown number. "Help is coming. Stay strong. 10 minutes." She felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. She had no idea who could be responding to her emergency alert. But someone was coming. She just had to hold out for 10 more minutes. Back on the road, Jake's truck was eating up the miles. Tanner was in the passenger seat, checking weapons and equipment while coordinating with the rest of the team over radio. "Wesley's 2 minutes behind us," Tanner reported. "Cooper and Garrett are converging from the east. They'll be there right after we arrive." Jake nodded, his jaw set in a grim line. "What do we know about the Iron Wolves?" Tanner had pulled up information on his tablet. "Local motorcycle club, about 25 active members. They've been linked to harassment, intimidation, some drug dealing. No major violence, but they like to push people around. Leader goes by Tank. Real name Robert Morrison, multiple arrests for assault and battery. Weapons? Unknown, but assume they're armed. These types usually carry knives, maybe some firearms." Jake made a hard right turn onto Route 47, his truck's engine roaring as he accelerated out of the corner. "Rules of engagement? Minimal force necessary to secure Riley and get her out safely," Tanner replied. "We're not looking for a war, just a rescue." As they crested a hill, Jake could see Ruby's diner in the distance. The parking lot was full of motorcycles, and he could make out a crowd of people gathered around what looked like a single figure near a white van. "There," Jake said, pointing. "Visual on target location." Tanner raised binoculars to his eyes. "I count at least 15 hostiles in a rough circle formation. One person in the center. Has to be Riley." Jake felt his anger rising, but he pushed it down. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Riley needed a professional response, not an emotional one. His phone rang. Wesley's voice came through the truck's speaker system. "Jake, I'm coming up behind you." "I can see the situation. Looks bad. Maintain distance until we're all in position," Jake replied. "We go in coordinated by the numbers." At the diner, Riley was running out of options. The bikers had grown bolder, and she could tell they were working themselves up to something worse than verbal harassment. The leader had moved within arm's reach, and 2 others were positioning themselves to cut off any escape route. "Last chance, hero," the leader said. "Get on your knees and apologize, or this gets a lot worse for you." Riley looked him straight in the eye. "I served my country with honor for 6 years. I earned every medal they gave me and every benefit I receive. I won't apologize to you for anything." The leader's face darkened. "Grab her," he told his friends. Riley tensed, ready to fight despite the odds. Her military training had taught her that sometimes you fought not because you could win, but because you refused to give up. Just then, she heard the distant rumble of powerful engines approaching fast. Not motorcycles, trucks. The leader heard it too. He paused, looking toward the road. 3 black vehicles came into view, moving at high speed toward the diner. They weren't police cars or emergency vehicles, but they moved with the kind of precision that suggested military training. "Who the hell is that?" one of the bikers asked nervously. Riley felt a surge of hope. She didn't know who was coming, but the professional way those vehicles were moving told her that help had arrived. The trucks pulled into the parking lot with tactical precision, forming a loose perimeter around the group of motorcycles. The engines shut off simultaneously, and for a moment, the only sound in the parking lot was the ticking of cooling metal and the nervous shifting of motorcycle boots on gravel. Car doors opened and 6 men stepped out. They weren't wearing uniforms, but everything about them screamed military. Their posture, their movements, the way they automatically spread out to control the area. The leader of the bikers suddenly looked a lot less confident than he had 60 seconds earlier. The 6 men who stepped out of the black trucks didn't look like much at first glance. No uniforms, no badges, no obvious weapons. They wore simple civilian clothes, jeans, t-shirts, work boots. But something about the way they moved made the bikers instinctively step back from Riley. Jake Coleman assessed the situation in seconds. One woman surrounded by 15 hostile males positioned near a van with handicapped plates, clear signs of harassment and intimidation. The tactical picture was simple. Extract the veteran, neutralize the threats, minimize collateral damage. He walked forward with calm confidence, his hands visible and relaxed at his sides. His team spread out naturally behind him, not in an aggressive formation but positioned to control key angles and escape routes. To Riley it looked casual. To the bikers it felt like walls closing in. "Afternoon, folks," Jake said in a conversational tone. "Beautiful day for a ride." The bearded leader of the bikers, who'd been so confident moments earlier, seemed unsure how to respond. These newcomers weren't acting like cops or security guards. They weren't showing weapons or shouting orders. But something about them made the air feel different. "This ain't your business, friend," the leader finally said. "We're just having a conversation with the lady here." Jake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Riley Martinez?" Riley's heart jumped. "Yes, that's me. Ma'am, I'm Jake Coleman, Danny Martinez's brother-in-law's unit leader. He talked about you a lot." Jake's voice carried clearly across the parking lot. "He said you saved his convoy in Kandahar. Said you were the toughest Marine he ever served with." Riley felt tears prick her eyes. She remembered Danny, a young Navy corpsman who'd been scared out of his mind during his first deployment until she'd taken him under her wing. "Danny's doing good," Jake continued, his eyes never leaving the biker leader. "Married now, 2 kids. He's a nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital in Indianapolis. Says he owes his life to Sergeant Martinez here." The dynamic in the parking lot shifted completely. The bikers suddenly realized they weren't dealing with a helpless disabled woman. They were facing someone who had real friends, people who cared enough to come when she needed help. "Like I said," the leader tried again, his voice less certain now. "This ain't your concern." Jake took another step forward. Now Riley could see the difference in how he moved compared to the bikers. Where they postured and swaggered, Jake moved with the fluid economy of someone who'd spent years in life-or-death situations. His teammates did the same, quiet, professional, ready. "See, that's where you're wrong," Jake said pleasantly. "Riley called for help. We came. Now we're all going to work together to make sure she gets home safe." Tanner had positioned himself near Riley's van, close enough to help her if needed, but far enough away to avoid escalating the situation. Wesley and Cooper flanked the group of motorcycles while Garrett remained near the trucks, ready to provide medical support or call for backup. The thin biker who'd been recording earlier was still holding his phone, but his hands were shaking now. "Who are you guys supposed to be?" "Just concerned citizens," Jake replied. "Veterans looking out for another veteran." "Bull," snapped the young biker who'd been the most aggressive toward Riley. "You guys are some kind of military or something." Jake shrugged. "We all served our country, if that's what you mean." Just like Riley did. Difference is, she actually saw combat. She actually bled for the flag you guys like to wave around on your motorcycles. The leader's face was getting red. "You don't know what you're talking about, pal. We support the troops." "Really?" Jake's voice hardened just slightly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been harassing a disabled veteran, blocking her vehicle, damaging her property, making threats." Riley watched the exchange with fascination. Jake wasn't raising his voice or making obvious threats, but somehow he was. Completely controlling the situation. The bikers were on the defensive now, backing up despite outnumbering Jake's team more than 2-1. "We weren't doing nothing illegal," the leader protested. Cooper spoke up from his position near the motorcycles. "Blocking handicapped parking spaces is illegal. Harassment based on disability status is illegal. Destruction of property is illegal." His voice had the flat professional tone of someone reading charges. "Intimidation with intent to cause fear of bodily harm is also illegal." "You a cop?" the thin biker asked nervously. "Former military police," Cooper replied. "But I remember my law." Wesley had quietly moved close enough to examine Riley's van. "Key scratch along the driver's side door," he reported. "Wheelchair ramp has been kicked over and damaged. Clear evidence of property destruction." The leader was starting to sweat despite the afternoon heat. Look, maybe we got a little carried away. No harm done. No harm done. Riley spoke up for the first time since Jake had arrived. Her voice was steady and strong. You surrounded me, threatened me, damaged my property, and made fun of my military service. You recorded it and broadcast it online. In what world is that no harm done? Jake nodded approvingly. Riley raises a good point. See, the thing about veterans is we look out for each other. When someone messes with one of us, especially someone who served with distinction, well, he spread his hands. Here we are. The young biker took a step toward Jake, trying to look tough. So what are you going to do about it, old man? Jake smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving. Old man? Son, I'm 38 years old and I spent 12 years in the Navy SEALs. I've been in situations you can't even imagine. But here's the thing, I don't need to do anything to you. You're going to do it to yourself. What's that supposed to mean? Jake pulled out his phone. See? My friend Wesley over there took some pictures of your motorcycles. License plates, club patches, faces. Cooper got some good video of you harassing Riley. And that live stream you were doing? That's evidence of conspiracy to commit harassment. The man with the phone suddenly stopped recording and shoved the device into his pocket. Now, Jake continued, here's what's going to happen. You're going to move your motorcycles away from Riley's van. You're going to apologize to her, and then you're going to leave. If I ever hear about you bothering veterans again, anywhere in this county, we're going to have another conversation. But next time I might not be feeling so generous. And if we don't? The leader asked, though his voice lacked conviction. Tanner spoke up from near Riley's van. Then we call our friends at the sheriff's department and the state police. We provide them with all this evidence. And we make sure Riley gets the best lawyers in the state to file civil rights violations against every single one of you. Garrett added helpfully. Federal charges, too. Interfering with a disabled veteran's access to public accommodation is a federal crime. FBI takes that stuff pretty seriously. The bikers looked around at each other uncertainly. They'd come to the diner looking for easy targets and cheap thrills. Instead, they'd found themselves facing professionals who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Jake sensed their hesitation and pressed his advantage. Look, nobody needs to go to jail today. Nobody needs lawyers or court dates. You made a mistake. We all make mistakes. The question is, are you smart enough to learn from it? The leader looked at his friends, then back at Jake. The fight had gone out of him completely. Fine, we'll move the bikes. And apologize to Riley. And apologize to the lady. Jake nodded. Good choice. The next few minutes felt surreal to Riley. The same bikers who'd been threatening and humiliating her just minutes before were now quietly moving their motorcycles, avoiding eye contact, muttering awkward apologies. The leader actually helped Tanner check her wheelchair ramp for damage. As the motorcycles started up and began leaving the parking lot, Jake walked over to Riley. Up close, she could see the concern in his eyes, the controlled anger on behalf of someone he'd never met, but felt responsible for protecting. You okay? He asked quietly. Riley nodded. I'm okay. But Jake, how did you know to come? How did you get here so fast? Jake smiled. Danny made me promise that if any of his Marines ever needed help, I'd be there. When your emergency alert came through our network, I knew exactly who you were. We were conducting training exercises just 15 miles away. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Jake replied. You saved my family. This is what family does for each other. As the last motorcycle disappeared down Route 47, Riley realized she was shaking, not from fear, but from relief. She'd gone from feeling completely helpless to being surrounded by people who understood exactly what she'd been through, both in the military and in the parking lot. The nightmare was over. But more than that, she'd learned something important. She wasn't alone. There were people out there who had her back, who valued her service, who would come running when she needed help. For the first time in years, Riley felt truly safe. 20 minutes after the last motorcycle disappeared down Route 47, 3 sheriff's department cars finally pulled into Ruby's Diner parking lot. Deputy Harrison, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a slight limp from his own military service, stepped out and immediately recognized the tactical positioning of Jake's team. Military? He asked Jake directly. Former, Jake replied. We responded to a veteran crisis call. Riley was sitting in the passenger seat of Jake's truck, still processing what had just happened. Tanner had given her a bottle of water and a protein bar, while Garrett had quietly checked her over to make sure she hadn't been physically hurt during the confrontation. Deputy Harrison listened carefully as Riley recounted the events. Jake's team provided the video evidence they'd gathered, including screenshots from the live stream that showed the bikers harassing her. The deputy took notes and shook his head more than once. "Ma'am, I apologize that it took us so long to get here," Harrison said to Riley. "We had a 3-car accident with injuries on the other side of the county. Every available unit was tied up." "It's okay," Riley replied. "Help came when I needed it." Harrison looked at Jake and his team with obvious respect. "Good thing you boys were in the area. This could have gotten ugly." Over the next hour, the deputy gathered statements and evidence. The livestream video had been shared hundreds of times before the bikers took it down, but Wesley had already archived copies. The footage clearly showed harassment, intimidation, and property damage. "We'll be issuing warrants," Harrison told Riley. The leader, Robert Morrison, goes by Tank, has priors for assault and battery. This incident, combined with his record, means he's looking at serious charges. 3 days later, Riley got a call from Deputy Harrison. 5 members of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club had been arrested. Tank was facing federal charges for violating the Americans with Disabilities Act, along with state charges for harassment, intimidation, and destruction of property. The others were charged as accomplices, but the legal consequences were just the beginning of the changes that followed. Ruby, the diner owner, was mortified when she learned what had happened in her parking lot. The next week, she installed security cameras covering the entire lot and partnered with the local veterans organization to make her restaurant an official Veterans Safe Zone. She put up a sign by the front door: "Veterans always welcome. Harassment will not be tolerated." More importantly, Ruby hired Tommy from Riley's support group to manage security and customer service. Tommy's military bearing and calm demeanor made troublemakers think twice about causing problems. The incident also caught the attention of local media. When the story broke, public support for Riley was overwhelming. A GoFundMe campaign started by someone who saw the original livestream raised enough money to repair her van and upgrade her mobility equipment. Riley tried to decline the money, but the organizers insisted she accept it. "You served our country," said Janet Williams, a local teacher who had organized the fundraiser. "This is just our community's way of saying thank you and showing that we don't tolerate that kind of behavior." More significantly, the crisis response network that had brought Jake to Riley's aid began to grow. Other veteran organizations reached out, wanting to know how they could create similar rapid response systems in their areas. Jake found himself traveling to different states, training other veteran groups on crisis intervention and mutual support. Within 6 months, the network had expanded from a small group of special operations veterans to a nationwide system involving thousands of former military personnel. They called it the Battle Buddy Emergency Network, and it connected veterans across the country who were willing to help each other in crisis situations. Riley became one of the network's most effective advocates. Her story and her willingness to share it publicly helped other veterans understand that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of wisdom. She started speaking at veteran events and conferences, always emphasizing the same message: we serve together overseas. We need to take care of each other at home too. 6 months after the diner incident, Riley received an invitation that changed her life. Congressman David Martinez, no relation despite the shared last name, had heard her story and wanted her to testify before a House subcommittee on veteran affairs. They were considering new legislation to strengthen protections for disabled veterans in public spaces. Riley was nervous about speaking in Washington, D.C., but Jake and his team drove down to support her. When she walked into the hearing room, she saw dozens of other veterans in the audience, all there to show their support. Her testimony was simple and powerful. She told her story without drama or self-pity, focusing on the facts and the need for better protection and support systems for all veterans. "What happened to me at that diner shouldn't happen to anyone," she said to the committee. "But what happened afterward, the way other veterans came to help me, that's what America should be about. We need to make sure that kind of support is available everywhere, not just where I was lucky enough to find it." The committee was visibly moved. When Riley finished speaking, she received a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. The legislation, dubbed the Veterans Protection Act, passed both houses of Congress and was signed into law 8 months later. It strengthened penalties for harassment of disabled veterans and provided funding for veteran crisis response networks in all 50 states. But perhaps the most important change was in Riley herself. A year after the incident, she was sitting in the same booth at Ruby's diner with her support group. Tommy was now working there full-time and had started a small motorcycle repair business in the back bay of the diner. Maria had graduated from nursing school and was working at the VA hospital. Old Pete had finally gotten his disability rating increased and was volunteering with homeless veterans. "You know what I realized?" Riley said, sipping her coffee and looking around the table at her friends. "For the longest time after I got hurt, I thought my military service was over, like that part of my life was just finished." "And now?" Maria asked. Riley smiled. "Now I understand that serving never really stops. It just changes form." Her phone buzzed with the familiar emergency alert tone. Another veteran, somewhere in the state, needed help. Riley looked at the GPS coordinates and the brief description of the situation. "Guys, I need to go," she said, standing up and reaching for her keys. "Veteran in trouble about 30 miles east of here." Tommy was already moving toward the door. "I'll drive." Maria grabbed her nursing bag from behind the counter. "Medical support." Pete tossed money on the table to cover everyone's coffee. "Road trip." As they walked out to Riley's van together, Riley felt the same sense of purpose she'd felt as a young Marine. The mission was different now, but the commitment was the same. Leave no one behind. Her phone rang. Jake's voice came through the speaker. "Riley, we got the alert too. My team's 20 minutes out." "Copy that," Riley replied, automatically falling back into military communication style. "We're en route." As they pulled out of Ruby's parking lot, Riley caught sight of the veteran safe zone sign by the front door. Below it, someone had added a handwritten message: "Home of the Battle Buddy Network." Riley smiled. She'd found her new mission, her new way to serve. And she'd learned that sometimes the worst moments in your life can lead to the most important work you'll ever do. The van headed east on Route 47, carrying 4 veterans toward someone who needed help. Behind them, other vehicles were converging. On the same location, Jake's team, local volunteer firefighters, a chaplain from the nearby VA hospital. Riley had called for help once and discovered a network of people ready to respond. Now she was part of that network, ready to answer the call when others needed support. The circle was complete. The mission continued. And no veteran would face their crisis alone.